Nobody warned Diane Washington that the morning she drove back to Carver Street would be the morning that changed everything. Not just for her. For an entire town that had spent 20 years believing the wrong people. She made the 3-hour drive from Springfield to Millhaven, Missouri in her old 2009 Toyota Camry. Dented bumper. A crack running across the lower left corner of the windshield she kept meaning to fix. No government plates. No badge. Just a woman in a faded blue cardigan and dark jeans. A gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder. And a manila folder on the passenger seat thick enough to use as a weapon if it came to that. The folder held 53 documents. She had counted them twice before leaving her apartment at 5:31 in the morning. The house on Carver Street was a small white craftsman bungalow with green shutters and a front porch that her mother had painted every spring without fail. Her mother, Ruth Washington, had bought it in 1987 for $58,000. She had refinished the hardwood floors herself. She had planted the hydrangea bushes along the front walk the summer Diane turned 7. She had paid off the mortgage in 2001 and kept the payoff letter in a fireproof lockbox under the bed alongside her birth certificate and her teaching license. Ruth Washington had died 16 months ago. She had left the house to Diane, her only child, free and clear. No mortgage, no debt, nothing owed to anyone. Diane pulled up to the curb and sat with the engine running. There was a padlock on the front door. A bright orange notice was taped to the front window. She already knew what it said. She had received a certified copy in the mail 3 weeks ago. Notice of foreclosure and eviction. Millhaven County Circuit Court. Case number 881-025. Presiding Judge, the Honorable Gerald Fitch. She turned off the engine, sat in the silence for exactly 47 seconds. Then she got out of the car. She walked up the front path, the same cracked concrete path she had walked up 10,000 times as a child, and stood on the porch of her mother's house. She pressed her palm flat against the front door. The wood was cold. The hydrangeas had not been watered. 3 of them were brown and brittle, already dead. She took out her phone and photographed everything. The padlock, the notice, the dead hydrangeas, the porch, the windows. 38 photographs in 6 minutes. Then she got back in her car and drove to the Millhaven County Courthouse. And here is the part of this story that most people never find out. Here is the thing that Gerald Fitch and Dennis Holt and everyone connected to Pinnacle Property Solutions did not know when they padlocked that door. Diane Washington was not just a grieving daughter trying to save her mother's house. She was a federal prosecutor. 11 years with the United States Attorney's Office in Springfield. She had put away insurance fraud rings. A county commissioner who had been stealing road repair funds for 8 years. And a mortgage fraud operation in Peoria that had stolen for $0.1 million from working families over 6 years. She knew exactly what a fraudulent foreclosure looked like. She had prosecuted 2 of them. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Because before any of that matters, you need to understand how this started. And it started the way most injustices start, quietly, with a letter. 9 months earlier, Diane had been in the middle of preparing closing arguments in a wire fraud case when her phone buzzed on the corner of her desk. An email from a law firm she had never heard of. Holton Briggs, Attorneys at Law, Millhaven, Missouri. The email informed her that Pinnacle Property Solutions had filed a foreclosure action against the property at 312 Carver Street, Millhaven, Missouri, citing an unpaid mortgage balance of $91,217.40. Diane read the email once. Then she read it again. Then she set her phone face down on the desk, walked to the window of her office on the 4th floor, and stood there looking out at the parking lot for a long time. Her mother had not had a mortgage. Her mother had paid off that house 24 years ago. Diane had the deed. She had the payoff letter. She had the title insurance certificate and every property tax receipt going back to 2001, all of it organized in the same fireproof lockbox her mother had, kept under the bed, which was now under Diane's bed in Springfield. She called the law firm that afternoon. A man named Dennis Holt answered. His voice had the particular quality of someone who dealt with upset people regularly and had learned to find it mildly entertaining. Miss Washington, the filing is a matter of public record. If you believe you have documentation that disputes the claim, you are welcome to submit it to the court. She submitted all of it. Every document in the lockbox. 53 pages of ironclad proof that Ruth Washington had owned that house free and clear for more than 2 decades. 4 weeks later, Judge Gerald Fitch ruled against her. The ruling was 5 paragraphs long. It cited a promissory note Diane had never seen. A second mortgage allegedly taken out by Ruth Washington in 2019. 2 years before Ruth's death, during the period when Ruth had been in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. The note bore Ruth's signature. Diane stared at that signature for a very long time. Her mother's handwriting had been precise and careful. 32 years of writing lesson plans and report cards had given Ruth Washington handwriting like a textbook, neat, deliberate, consistent. The signature on the promissory note was shaky, uncertain. The handwriting of someone who did not fully understand what was in front of her. Diane filed an appeal the same afternoon. The appeal was assigned to Judge Fitch. He denied it in 5 days. That was the moment Diane Washington stopped being a grieving daughter trying to navigate the legal system and started being a federal prosecutor who had just been handed the most personal case of her career. She spent the next 5 months doing what she did best, quietly, methodically, without telling anyone what she had found until she was certain. She pulled Pinnacle Property Solutions, corporate filings. The company had been incorporated in Millhaven County in 2015. Its registered agent was a man named Robert Caswell. Robert Caswell was also the registered agent for 9 other shell companies, all incorporated within the same 8-month window, all sharing the same address at a commercial suite on Merchant Avenue in downtown Millhaven. She pulled Judge Fitch's annual financial disclosures. In 2021, Fitch had reported a personal loan of $45,000 from a private lender identified as RC Capital Partners. RC Capital Partners shared a registered agent with Pinnacle Property Solutions. Robert Caswell. She pulled the property records for every foreclosure Fitch had presided over in the past 5 years, 29 cases. In 23 of them, the foreclosing entity was either Pinnacle Property Solutions or one of the 9 shell companies. In 21 of those 23 cases, the property had subsequently been purchased at auction by a holding company called Millhaven Community Development Group. She looked up Millhaven Community Development Group. Its primary stakeholder was a man named Warren Fitch, Gerald Fitch's brother. Diane sat at her kitchen table at 2:43 in the morning, surrounded by printed documents and a cold cup of tea, and felt something settle in her chest like a stone dropping into still water. This was not a paperwork error. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a machine. A quiet, patient, carefully assembled machine for stealing homes from people who could not fight back. Elderly people. People with dementia. People who had spent their entire lives building something and who did not know that the document being placed in front of them was not what they were told it was. Her mother had not been the first. She would not have been the last. She thought about the other 21 families. She thought about what it meant to lose a house. Not just the money. Not just the property value. The house where your children grew up. The house where your parents died. The house that meant you had made it. That you had built something real in a world that had not always made that easy. She thought about what it cost to take that from someone. Then she picked up her phone and called Gerald Patton. Gerald Patton was her supervisor at the United States Attorney's Office. He had been a federal prosecutor for 25 years and he had the particular quality of stillness that comes from having seen almost everything. He listened to Diane for 14 minutes without interrupting. When she finished, there was a silence. Then he said, "How solid is it?" "Solid enough to open a formal investigation. Not solid enough to indict. Not yet." "Build it," he said. "But Diane, you understand you cannot lead this. You are a victim in this case." "I know," she said. "You will need to step back once we bring in the full team." "I know," she said. She did not step back. Not yet. She had 4 more months of work to do first. "Now, before we go any further, stop and think about what this woman was carrying." She was working a full caseload at the United States Attorney's Office. She was driving 3 hours to Millhaven on weekends to pull courthouse records. She was building a federal case against a sitting judge in her spare time. And every single morning she woke up knowing that her mother's house, the house with the hydrangeas and the hardwood floors and 30 years of memories, was sitting padlocked on Carver Street while the people who had stolen it went about their lives without a moment of concern. She did not fall apart. She did not make threats. She did not confront anyone or tip her hand or let anyone in Millhaven know what she was building. She just kept working. On a Thursday morning in November, she drove back to Millhaven and walked into the offices of Pinnacle Property Solutions on Merchant Avenue, 3rd floor, Suite 314. The receptionist was a young man who looked surprised to have a visitor who had not called ahead. "I would like to speak with someone about a foreclosure matter," Diane said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." The receptionist made a phone call. Eamon appeared from a back office 90 seconds later. Heavy-set, gray suit, the kind of confident walk that comes from never having been told no. He introduced himself as Craig Hollis, Director of Loan Servicing. "Miss Washington," he said, like he already knew exactly who she was. "That is correct." Hollis put his hands in his pockets. "We have been through this. The court has ruled. Twice. I have documentation proving my mother never took out a second mortgage," Diane said. Her voice was completely level. Hollis smiled. It was the kind of smile that is designed to make people feel small. "Miss Washington, I understand this is an emotional situation. Grief can make us want to find explanations that are easier than the truth. Sometimes our loved ones make financial decisions they do not share with their families." Diane looked at him for a moment. She had a gift for this. 11 years of cross-examining witnesses had given her the ability to look at a person and show them absolutely nothing of what she was thinking. "My mother had Alzheimer's disease," she said, when that document was allegedly signed. Hollison crossed his arms. "I think you should direct any further questions to our legal team." "I think you are right," Diane said. She left. In the elevator going down, she took out her phone and added Craig Hollis to the list she had been building for 5 months. The list now had 11 names on it. She drove back to Springfield that evening. She had a meeting the next morning with 2 agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Unit, a forensic document examiner named Patricia Reeves, and Gerald Patton. She had 41 new pieces of evidence to present. The meeting lasted for hours and 53 minutes. By the end of it, Gerald Patton had authorized a full federal investigation. He had also, gently but firmly, removed Diane from the case as a prosecutor and designated her as a witness and a victim. She had nodded and said she understood. She had also handed him a 128-page investigative memo she had prepared over the previous 5 months, organized by subject, cross-referenced, with a table of contents, an index, and a summary of recommended investigative steps in order of priority. Patton looked at the memo for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "Sarah." "Diane," she said. He looked up. "Right, Diane." He shook his head slowly. "You built the whole case." "I had a personal reason to get it right," she said. He picked up the memo and started reading. The federal investigation took 7 months. Diane was not supposed to be involved. Officially, she was not involved. She returned to her regular caseload. She tried a tax fraud case and a bank robbery case and a complicated securities violation involving a chain of auto dealerships. She did her job. She did it well. She also answered every call from the investigating agents within 2 rings. She responded to every email within 15 minutes. When the forensic document examiner, Patricia Reeves, confirmed that the signature on the promissory note was consistent with a guided forgery, meaning someone had physically moved Ruth Washington's hand across the page while she held the pen, Diane had already identified the notary whose stamp appeared on the document and traced that notary to a part-time employee of Pinnacle Property Solutions named Gary Sutton. Gary Sutton had notarized 38 documents for Pinnacle Property Solutions over 4 years. He had been paid in cash, between $300 and $500 per document. He had a prior conviction for document fraud in 2012. Gary Sutton was the first person to cooperate with federal investigators. He talked for 7 hours and 20 minutes. he cried twice. He said he had not known about the Alzheimer's cases at first. He said that when he found out, he had told himself it was not his problem. He said he had been wrong. He said he was sorry. When he was done talking, the investigators had enough to move. The arrests happened on a Wednesday morning in April. Diane was reviewing case files in her office in Springfield when Gerald Patton appeared in her doorway at 8:14 in the morning. He did not say anything at first. He just looked at her. "How many?" she said. 8 arrests. Hollis, Caswell, Sutton, 2 loan officers, a title company employee who had been falsifying ownership searches, and Dennis Holt from the law firm. He paused. Diane did not move. "And Warren Fitch," Patton added, "the brother, charged separately." She nodded once. Patton crossed his arms. "The agents are at Fitch's house right now." Gerald Fitch was arrested at his home at 7:27 in the morning. He was in his kitchen having breakfast. His wife was there. His son, who was visiting from college, was there. The Federal Bureau of Investigation agents knocked on the front door and presented the arrest warrant while a third agent waited in the driveway. Fitch looked at the warrant and said, "This is a misunderstanding." He said it twice. The agents did not respond to that. They had heard it before. He was charged with wire fraud, bribery, conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. The civil rights charge carried a federal enhancement because 20 of the 23 fraudulent foreclosure cases he had presided over involved elderly black homeowners. The pattern was not difficult to see once someone looked for it. Diane had looked for it. Warren Fitch was charged 2 days later. His company, Millhaven Community Development Group, had acquired 17 properties through the fraudulent foreclosure scheme. The combined assessed value of those properties was $3.8 million. The trial lasted for weeks. Diane sat in the gallery every single day. She was a witness, not a prosecutor. She testified on the 9th day for 2 hours and 51 minutes. She described receiving the foreclosure notice. She described her mother's handwriting and the difference between it and the signature on the promissory note. She described the 53 documents she had submitted to the court and the 5-paragraph ruling that had dismissed all of them without explanation. She described driving to Millhaven and standing on her mother's porch with a padlock on the door. She did not raise her voice once during her testimony. She did not cry. She answered every question with the same calm precision she brought to every courtroom she had ever stood in. The jury was out for 11 hours and 40 minutes. They came back with guilty verdicts on all counts for all 8 defendants. Gerald Fitch stood at the defense table when the verdicts were read. He was very still. His attorney put a hand on his arm. Fitch did not move. He stared straight ahead as the jury foreperson read each count. Guilty, 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 guilty. When it was over, when the judge had thanked the jury and the courtroom had begun to stir, Fitch turned and looked across the gallery. His eyes found Diane. She was already looking at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then something shifted in Fitch's face. Something that had been held rigid for a very long time. His jaw loosened. His shoulders dropped slightly. He looked for the first time in the entire trial like a man who understood what he had done. He opened his mouth as if he was going to say something. His attorney touched his arm again and guided him toward the door. He was sentenced 6 weeks later to 14 years in federal prison. His brother Warren received 9 years. Craig Hollis received 8 years. Dennis Holt received 6 years. The remaining defendants received sentences ranging from 2 to 4 years. Gary Sutton, who had cooperated fully, received 18 months and was ordered to pay restitution. The restitution order covered all 23 families. Ruth Washington's estate was among them. On a Friday morning in May, Diane drove back to Millhaven for the last time. She parked on Carver Street and sat in her car for a moment. The padlock was gone. The orange notice was gone. A locksmith had come 2 days earlier and changed the locks back. The deed had been restored to the estate. The fraudulent lien had been vacated by the federal court. She got out of the car and walked up the front path. The hydrangeas were still damaged. 3 of them had not survived the winter without care. But 2 of them, the ones closest to the porch steps, had come back. Small green shoots pushing up through the dead stalks. stubborn and quiet and alive. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house smelled like dust and closed rooms, and underneath all of that, something older. Something that belonged to her mother. She stood in the front hallway and did not move for a long time. The hardwood floors were still there. The kitchen still had the yellow curtains her mother had sewn in 2004. The small bedroom at the end of the hall still had the blue paint her mother had chosen because she said it was the color of a clear morning. Diane walked through every room slowly. She was not in a hurry. In the kitchen, she found a coffee mug still sitting on the counter. Her mother's favorite, white with a small blue flower painted on the side. Ruth had used it every morning for 15 years. Diane picked it up carefully and held it in both hands. She thought about the other 22 families. She thought about the ones who had not had a federal prosecutor in the family. The ones who had submitted their documents and been denied and had not known what to do next. The ones who had lost their houses and moved away and tried to rebuild. She thought about what it meant to fight a system that was designed to make you feel like fighting was pointless. She thought about her mother sitting in a bank office in 2019. A woman in the early stages of a disease that was quietly taking her memory. Being handed a document and told to sign it, not understanding what it was, trusting the people in front of her because she had spent her whole life believing that institutions weren't trustworthy. Diane set the coffee mug down gently on the counter. She pulled out her phone and made a call. The woman who answered was named Beverly Marsh. She was a housing rights attorney in Springfield who had spent 12 years helping families fight predatory lending. Diane had called her 2 months earlier, before the trial, to ask a question about restitution procedures. They had talked for an hour and a half. By the end of the call, they had the outline of something larger. The Millhaven case had identified 23 victims, but the investigative team had found evidence suggesting similar operations in 4 other Missouri counties. Different shell companies, different names, the same structure. Beverly, Diane said, I am at the house. How does it feel? Like it should feel, Diane said, and like there is more work to do. There was a pause. Then Beverly said the coalition meeting is Tuesday. 12 families confirmed so far. More calling in every day. I will be there, Diane said. She stayed in the house for 2 hours. She opened the windows to let the air move through. She watered the 2 surviving hydrangeas. She sat on the porch for a while and watched the street. A woman walked by with a small child. An older man waved from across the street. A car moved slowly past, music playing low. Carver Street looked like any other street in any other small American town. Quiet. Ordinary. The kind of place where nothing much seemed to happen. But things had happened here, things that mattered. A machine had been built to take from people who had spent their lives building. And one woman had decided that was not acceptable. Not because she was powerful. Not because she had resources most people do not have. But because she had looked at what was happening and had refused to look away. On the day of Gerald Fitch's sentencing, before the judge read the sentence, Fitch had been given the opportunity to address the court. He stood at the podium for a moment without speaking. His attorney had prepared a statement. Fitch did not use it. He said, I told myself it was legal. I told myself the documents were valid and the process was proper and I was simply doing my job. He stopped. I knew about the Alzheimer's cases. I knew what the signatures meant. I signed the orders anyway. He looked down at the podium. I told myself these were just properties. Numbers on a page. I did not let myself think about what they were to the people who owned them. He paused again. I was wrong. I was wrong about all of it. And I am sorry. I know that does not fix anything. The judge had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had read the sentence. 14 years. Diane had listened to Fitch's statement from the gallery. She had not felt satisfaction exactly. What she felt was something more complicated. Something that had to do with the distance between understanding that you have done wrong and actually understanding what that wrong cost the people you did it to. Fitch understood now. He would have 14 years to understand it more completely. On the Tuesday after she visited the house, Diane drove to Springfield and walked into a conference room at the offices of the Midwest Housing Justice Coalition. 12 families were seated around a table. Some of them had lost their homes. Some of them were still fighting. Some of them had driven 2 hours to be there. Beverly Marsh introduced Diane simply. She said, "This is Diane Washington. She is a federal prosecutor. Her mother's house was taken the same way yours was. She is here because she wants to help." A woman across the table, maybe 60 years old, with careful eyes and hands folded in front of her, looked at Diane for a moment. "They took my mother's house too," the woman said. "She had it for 31 years. Diane sat down. "Tell me everything," she said. "The work was not over. It was not close to over. There were for other counties. There were other shell companies. There were other judges whose financial disclosures would need to be pulled and cross-referenced and examined. There were other families who had submitted their documents and been denied and had not known what to do next. But something had changed, something that could not be unchanged. A machine that had operated quietly for years had been exposed. The people who ran it were going to prison. The families who had been robbed were being made whole, as much as money and restored deeds could make anyone whole. And the story of how it had been exposed, one woman with a manila folder and 53 documents and the patience to build a case that could not be ignored. That story was being told, not because Diane Washington wanted to be known, because the families deserved to be known, because Ruth Washington deserved to be known, because the hydrangeas on Carver Street were coming back, slow and stubborn, and that meant something. There is a thing that happens when a system designed to make people feel powerless meets someone who refuses to feel powerless. The system does not always lose immediately. It does not always lose easily. Sometimes it wins for a long time before it loses. But it loses because the people it is designed to defeat are not numbers on a page. They are not just properties. They are people who planted hydrangeas and paid off mortgages and kept their documents in fireproof lock boxes and raised children who grew up to understand exactly what justice looks like and exactly what it costs to pursue it. Ruth Washington raised one of those children. That turned out to matter more than Gerald Fitch ever imagined it would. 1 year after the trial, the Missouri State Legislature passed the Homeowner Protection and Judicial Accountability Act. The law required mandatory independent review of all foreclosure proceedings involving properties owned free and clear. It established a state registry of predatory lending complaints. It created a dedicated unit within the state attorney general's office to investigate judicial conflicts of interest in property cases. The bill was introduced by a state senator from Springfield who had read about the Millhaven case in the newspaper. She had called Diane to ask if she would testify before the committee. Diane had said yes. She had also brought Beverly Marsh and 4 of the families from the coalition. The committee had listened for 6 hours. The bill passed by a margin of 31-4. On the morning the governor signed the bill into law, Diane was back at the house on Carver Street. She had been spending weekends there, slowly bringing it back. The floors had been refinished. The yellow kitchen curtains had been washed and rehung. The porch had been repaired. She had replanted the hydrangeas. All of them, new ones, in the same spots where the old ones had been. She had watered them every weekend for 2 months. That morning, standing on the porch with a cup of coffee in her mother's favorite mug, she watched the first one bloom, small and blue and completely certain of itself. She thought about Ruth Washington, who had bought this house for $58,000 in 1987 and had paid it off and had kept every document in a fireproof lockbox because she understood that what you build can be taken from you if you are not careful. She thought about what her mother had given her. Not just the house. The understanding that dignity is not something that is given to you. It is something you insist on, quietly, consistently, with documentation. She took a sip of coffee. Then she went inside to get ready for work. There was still more to do.